And actually, this project will be presented at AAAI in February. And as we learned yesterday, we'll only have a poster presentation, so I'm particularly glad that I can present it here today. Great. So the project is motivated by, I guess, an application that many of you know, and that is participatory budgeting, where, just to quickly explain what's the idea, is that there's a city that has a public budget and wants to allocate a fraction of this budget wants to ask the citizens on how they should invest this budget. And for that, how this is done in practice usually is that there exists a set of project proposals that is then presented to the voters, and then the voters express their preferences over these proposals. And given this information, the city then allocates the budget. Now, this idea is becoming more popular every year, and this is just a screenshot from Wikipedia, and there exists a very long list of cities all over Europe and outside of Europe that actually apply participatory budgeting every year. Now, if we study participatory budgeting from the theoretical point of view, or from the social choice point of view, of course, there exist many different models and how you can model this problem. And in most models, what they all have in common is that there exists a set of voters and a set of projects. In most models, usually we attach a price or some cost to each of the projects, and then we say, well, either this project is funded or the project is not funded. In our setting, we look at a bit more flexible scheme, namely that the city can arbitrarily allocate the budget over the projects. So there are no fixed costs for the projects. And now the idea is, okay, how do we ask the voters for what are their opinions about the projects? And here the idea is that we also ask the voters, we directly ask them, okay, what do you think would be the best allocation of the budget over the projects? So if you were in the shoes of the city, what would you do? How would you allocate the budget? So more formally, a vote simply consists of an m-dimensional vector, which is normalized to 1. So with our loss of generality, we assume that the budget is 1 here. And we have 1 vote per voter, and the output is of the very same form, again, an m-dimensional vector normalized to 1. Now, a voting mechanism simply takes as input these votes and outputs one allocation, which I will also refer to as the aggregate. Now, of course, we will have to make assumptions on what are the voters' opinion over the set of aggregates. So how do the voters compare different aggregates? And for that, we are going to make this the simple assumption that voters compare the aggregates by their L1 disutility. So to give you an example, what this means is, look, for example, here at the first voter. The voter can evaluate the aggregate by simply going over all of the projects, and for every project, summing up the absolute difference between what the voter would have given to the project and what the aggregate gives to the project. So this is the assumption for the disutility that they are facing. Now, in this project, we're interested in truthful mechanisms for this setting. And truthfulness is here defined in a very standard way, meaning that no voter can decrease its disutility by misreporting their preferences. So if a voter deviates from their actual true preferences to something else, so from VI to VI star, then the disutility cannot decrease. Now, if we think about mechanisms in this space, then you might immediately think about the mean or the average, like just taking the average of all of the voter reports. That's a feasible voting mechanism. However, this voting mechanism is not truthful. And to see this, we can look at this example here, where the second voter would really like the aggregate to give more budget to the green project and less budget to the orange project. And it can actually achieve that by misreporting its preferences and saying, okay, actually my preference would be to give everything to green. And now the aggregate actually moves in that direction. So the mean is not truthful. Now, okay, so there's a question in chat. Let me quickly. May the utility of a project can be negative, that is, a voter does not want that certain project to be selected. Well, yeah, that's implicit. So if a voter doesn't give anything to some project, Like if the voter gives 0 to some project, then of course the L1 distance will always be positive for this project, no matter what the aggregate gives to that project. So this is implicit in the how we model the utilities. Hope that answers the question. Okay. Great. So before we talk about truthful mechanisms in this setting, let me introduce a new type of illustration, which has been proven to be extremely helpful in the literature. And in this illustration, we have one vertical bar per project. And this vertical bar simply corresponds to the interval between 0 and 1. And now we can illustrate a voter. So here we illustrate the first voter by simply adding these adding horizontal lines to each of the bars. So for the voter, like for each of the projects, we just add a line where whatever the voter wants to give to that project. We can continue doing that for the other voters, and now we will add more lines to this illustration. Of course, now it gets a bit tricky to distinguish between the different voters. However, we won't need that for our mechanisms. And last but not least, we also illustrate the aggregate in this illustration by white boxes in the very same way. Okay, and with that, I would like to come to truthful mechanisms in that setting. And before we go to the general case of any number of projects, let's look at a special case for 2 projects, where we only have 2 projects. And in that case, I claim that this reduces to, or this was all known before, but like this reduces to something which I very vaguely call interval voting here. So if we only have 2 projects and we give like the voter reports are normalized vectors, then all of the information is already within the first project. Because if someone reports X for the first project, well, this person will also report 1 minus X for the other project. So without loss of generality, we can fix ourselves so we can only look at the first project. And now this simply reduces to a case where voters report give us reports on within the interval 0 and 1, and they simply want the aggregate to be as close as possible to them. Now, for this setting, this is a very well-known setting and a special case of voting on a single peak domain. So there exists this very classic characterization by Moulin that says that an anonymous and continuous aggregation mechanism is truthful if and only if we can express this in the following way. Namely, there exist n+1 constant values such that the mechanism, what it will do, it will simply take the median of the voter reports and these constant values. And these constant values, they are also referred to sometimes as phantom voters, which is why I indicated them here by these little ghosts. Now, the question on how one can generalize this idea to the more dimensional case is something that's non-trivial, but luckily Rupert and Dominic and others have worked on this. And they have came up with a quite general class of mechanisms that generalize this idea of phantom mechanisms. And the idea here is that, well, while we cannot just place constant values on each of the projects and then take the median, because that wouldn't be normalized, what they do, or what they suggest, is to come up with what they call a phantom system. And the phantom system is nothing else than, so we have n+1 continuous non-decreasing functions mapping from 0,1 to 0,1. And the idea here is that the phantom voters, they have a time dependency. So at time 0, all of the phantom voters are at 0, and as time increases, they increase over the interval. I'm going to illustrate that in a second. And they also suggest one concrete phantom system, which is called the independent market phantom system, where we have one phantom that moves with speed 1 over n, one that moves with speed 2 over n, and so on and so forth. So let's illustrate this. So these are for now only the phantom voters. This is not a mechanism yet. So we just have these phantom voters that increase over time. And now we can define a moving phantom mechanism is defined as follows. Given a phantom system, it simply returns the median of the voter reports and the phantom and the phantom voters at a given point in time, at a specific point in time. And this point in time is T star, which exactly ensures normalization. So to illustrate this again, in the beginning, all of the phantoms are at 0, meaning that also all of the medians for each of the coordinates will be at 0. Now we increase the phantoms, which means that also the medians will increase. And at some point, we will reach a point where the medians reach normalization, and that is exactly when we return the outcome. This is the outcome that we will return. Okay, so what they also showed was that any moving phantom mechanism is in particular truthful, neutral, anonymous, and continuous, which is of course very nice. However, what we do not know yet is whether, or what is an open question, is whether there actually exist other mechanisms that also satisfy these properties. So in other case, is this again a characterization, yes or no, as it was for the case of two projects? And so we're currently working on this, and we do have some evidence that in fact there might exist other mechanisms. Okay. So, but for this project, we did not know yet of any other mechanism outside of this class. And this is why we really focused on the class of moving phantom mechanisms for now. And the approach we took here was to say, okay, now we know about the whole class of truthful mechanisms, but what if we want to be truthful, but still fair in some way? And for that, I would like to argue that the mean, as we have seen before, is not only a natural aggregation rule, but it also serves as a bench line for for fairness. So just to make this formal, what I mean when I talk about the mean. So for every project, we just take the average vote. Now, one thing that Edith, Varud, and Niklas have recently studied, they compared many different voting mechanisms in this setting, and they came up with this score representation notion, which basically just says, so this is a bit of a representation type axiom. So it says that if we have a group of voters where all of the voters of this group, they vote above a certain threshold, then the aggregate should give at least this threshold times the fraction of the group to this project. And what they found is that at least among the rules that they studied, the mean was the only one satisfying this axiom. And with a similar argument, I think that we can interpret the mean as something like a fair share for the projects, because if you just imagine you would give each of the voters a budget of 1/n and then let them decide what to do according to their own favorite allocation, well, then this is exactly what you get. So looking at the thing or the setting from the project perspective, I think that the mean is something like, can be interpreted something as a fair share. Now, what would be really bad would be if there exists one project that is like heavily over or underfunded. And because of that, we wanted to study the notion of, or we introduced the notion of alpha project fairness. And this simply looks at, for a given aggregate, what's the maximum deviation of any project towards the mean. And we want to upper bound that in the worst case. So, we're searching for, or we want to understand what's the best alpha that we can hope for here in this setting of our mechanism is alpha project fair. Now there exists a quite strong lower bound, and I'm citing Karagiannis et al. Here because so even though their paper was before we even introduced this notion, but they look at a different fairness notion I'm going to talk to in a second, and they provided an example which actually shows us that or gives us this lower bound immediately. So the lower bound is roughly one half, depending on the number of projects. So let me quickly explain this lower bound. Here in the case of 3 projects, the idea is that we have an even number of voters, and we divide them into 2 groups, where half of the group report 1, 0, 0, and the other half reports 1/m, one third. Now, no matter how our moving phantom mechanism looks like, at some point in time, the middle phantom will be, when the middle phantom reaches 1/3, then the median is exactly attained at one third for all of the projects, meaning that at this very point in time we reach normalization. And so no matter how the phantom mechanism looks like, on this profile it will always return one third. And so then we get a deviation of 1/3 on the first for the first project. And this can now easily be generalized to general M. Okay, so now our goal was to try to actually find a mechanism that gives us exactly this lower bound, so that exactly matches this lower bound. And of course, the first candidate was to check something like independent markets, which was already known before. However, as I said, in independent markets, well, all of the phantoms start moving at the very same time. And what we observed was that this is a problem which always leads to having very high or having very limited project fairness. I think I don't have time to go through this in detail, but for example, independent market basically already has cannot be better than one project fair. Okay, and so now as a compound, like first of all, you could think, okay, if we cannot move all of them at the very same time, what about moving them one after the other? That also doesn't work. So for that, we also have a counterexample. So because of that, we wanted to have a compromise, and we introduced the ladder mechanism, which is exactly a compromise to those two extremes. And this is easily understood if you think about a rope ladder that lies on the ground, and now the ranks of this ladder correspond to the phantoms. And now you slowly pick this ladder up, and the phantoms, they move up like the ranks of the ladder. So let me introduce this. I'll make this a bit more formal. So here, they're all at 0 in the beginning, and now you move the first phantom. Once it reaches a distance of 1/n to the bottom, the next one starts growing, and so on and so forth. And we show that this mechanism actually gives us optimal project fairness. Now, this result, so this is the main result of our paper. However, it does have some implications for fairness notions that were studied before. And this is a notion that was introduced by Karagiannis et al. So what they were interested in was not looking at the L infinity distance of the aggregate to the mean, but the L1 distance. And what they showed was that no moving phantom mechanism, so they gave a lower bound, no moving phantom mechanism can be better than 1 minus 1/m. Again, they also showed that independent markets cannot be optimal. And last but not least, they introduced a new mechanism, which they call the piecewise uniform mechanism. And they showed that this is essentially optimal for 3 projects. Now, what's important to know about both the mechanism and the analysis is that the mechanism itself, I think, is arguably more complicated than the ladder mechanism. And also they get this epsilon here, which is due to the fact that actually this result uses some heavy machinery, including quadratic programs and a computer-aided proof. So, and what we are able to get as a corollary of our result was that, well, the observation here is that for small number of projects, project fairness actually implies approximation guarantees. And in particular, for 3 projects, alpha project fairness gives us 2 alpha approximation. So as a result of our, as a corollary, we actually get a tight upper bound for 3 projects, and we get the first non-trivial bounds for higher number of projects. So with that, I would like to come to future work. So of course, the question for higher number of M, like what are the best approximation guarantees that we can get here, are still very wide open. And actually, yeah, we also don't know which techniques to use to actually solve that. Of course, you can also think about other types of approximations. So for example, a 2 approximation. Interestingly, I think if we look at the question from a practical perspective, then I think worst case guarantees are always a bit tricky. So if someone has an idea on how to analyze this beyond the worst case analysis, I think this would be super interesting as well. And then, of course, the open question I already mentioned about whether there exist other interesting mechanisms beside moving phantoms, and if so, whether they can provide better approximation guarantees. And with that, I would like to end my talk, and I'm very happy to receive questions. Thanks.
Hey, thanks, Ulrike. So let's unmute ourselves and give Ulrike a round of applause. Okay, so we had one question in the chat by Luis, which Ulrike already answered during the talk. So Luis, did this address your question?
It's right. It's okay. I got it. It is something that simply I always ask myself when I see these papers on participatory budgeting, and you assume that, well, in this case, as far as I understood, it's not approval voting, but in any case, you may not want, sometimes people do not want something to be realized. And this is not always captured in the models. But it's okay. I'm satisfied.
Thank you.
Okay, then, so I think Ariel had some question about which way the inequality for alpha goes, but I think this has been clear now as well. But maybe Ulrike, you can just confirm that the inequality goes in that direction. That was
so I guess this was at for the definition of alpha project fairness.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
I think this should be correct, because we say it is a positive statement, like a mechanism if a mechanism satisfies this inequality, then we call it alpha project fair. So this is the upper bound for deviation.
Yes, I was confused because I thought about fairness like a lower bound, but this is actually this utility, so you need to upper bound the distance. Okay.
Yes, so this is not really this utility here, because this is about, we talk about the aggregate, like the difference between the aggregate and the mean. So it's not about individual disutility, but in a sense, like they say, like communal like aggregated disutility.
It's unfairness. It measures the unfairness. Larger distance means yes. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So then there's another question. The phantoms are discrete at any moment. All their weight is concentrated at one location. Have continuous distributions been considered? I'm not sure I understand this question. So what could you clarify? What do you mean by continuous distributions?
Well, a phantom is like a Dirac delta function, right? It's voting for one thing rather than voting continuous distribution over things.
Oh.
And it seems to me continuous distributions should work just as well as discrete ones that are being used. I'm not sure whether they offer any more flexibility in terms of what you get from the mechanism.
I would conjecture that. Okay, so when you say continuous distribution, you mean something like, okay, this phantom, like this fraction of the phantom is voting for something, and another fraction of the voter is.
But that's still discrete if there are finitely many fractions that add to one. I'm saying they represent a distribution of weight, right? That could be flexing over time.
But I think that the points where the median can be attained, that they would be discrete still.
Maybe we should continue this discussion, offline later.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Sure. So there was another question, LP for P arbitrary, wide open. So do you mean like in terms of approximation, that's open?
Oh, I mean that if you let P range from 1 to infinity, you may expect some behavior which has some kind of critical discontinuities concerning the degree of approximability or the behavior of the output. So I'm not seeing why P is 2 should do anything special. maybe everything happens at p is 1, maybe everything happens at p infinity. Maybe there are interesting transitions in between.
Yeah, sure. That's true for sure. Though I think another interesting question is whether there might exist a mechanism that is optimal for both L1 and L infinity. And I think so far we don't have any reason to believe that this would not be the case. So we have our mechanism, which is optimal for L infinity and optimal for L1 for up to 3 projects. And we have this other mechanism by Karagianis et al., which is optimal for 3 projects. And we also conjecture actually it to be optimal for L infinity. So it could be that actually these are strongly connected.
Okay, thanks. Nice presentation.
Thanks.
So you mentioned that you have indications that there are more truthful mechanisms than moving phantom mechanisms. Can you give us some idea what those might look like?
Sure. I'm looking at Rupert, whether how much you want to say about that, or I know.
Sorry, I actually missed the question. I was in the chat.
Okay, so Florian asked for the indication that there exist other truthful moving phantom mechanisms, other truthful mechanisms besides moving phantom.
Oh, I leave that to you.
Yeah, maybe we'll talk about that in a few months from now. So it's still very recent, and yeah.
Okay, let's hope so. Yeah. Any more questions?
So what is anything known about general mechanisms, like a upper bound on fairness for general mechanisms, or only for moving phantoms?
Right. So I think, I mean, in the paper of Karagianis, they have some general upper bounds for the L1 approximation. I don't have them on top of my mind at the moment, but I know that they're significantly weaker than the ones for moving phantom mechanisms. And I think from there we should also get some for our notion of fairness. But there's a gap for sure. Yeah.
So in theory, it is possible that there is any mechanism, not moving phantom, that is truthful and fair, absolutely fair, one fair, zero fair.
One fair.
I mean zero fair.
Zero fair. No, zero fair. No. I think because that would only be the mean, right? Zero fair can only be the mean.
Okay, so it cannot be truthful. So, but we don't know anything, any constant larger than 0. We don't have.
I mean, I think if you go to the paper by Karagianis and have a close look at their bound for L1, I think from that we also directly get one for L infinity.
Okay.
Okay. So if there are no more questions, then before we move on to Simon's talk, let's take our usual coffee break. So you'll be assigned to a breakout room. And then in about 10 minutes, we'll go back to the next talk. Okay, so see you again in a couple of minutes.
On and off again, or off and on.
So then let's move on to our second speaker. So our second speaker is Simo, who somewhat recently finished his PhD, and now he's a senior scientific programmer at the University of Amsterdam. And today he will tell us about PrefLib and other COMSOC tools. Simo, would you like to start sharing?
Yes.
Okay, so the screen is yours.
Yes, thank you. Thanks for having me. Maybe something a bit different from the usual COMSOC talks here. So I'm going to quickly remind everyone and advertise some of the tools that have been developed within the community. And then I'm hoping to get a more general discussion at the end of it. So I'll try to be somewhat brief so that we have more time to chat all 58 of us together, which probably will be fun. Anyways, so today I'm talking about PrefLib and other tools. And I will start with PrefLib and just give a brief introduction, as PrefLib is a website that hosts reported preference data. So different situations where people have reported their preferences over some alternatives. It's not always people, it's sometimes inferred, but in general is the idea of having more or less rankings over alternatives that come from the real world. We have rankings, whether they are strict or not, or incomplete or not, and all of that. We have a bit of matching data. We have categorical type of data that I will come back to in a sec. And yeah, and so we're hosting quite a lot of things now. We have kind of coming from 58 sources and around 14,000 data files. So it's a quite nice, nice platform and can allow you to explore a lot of different things based on real life data. And so the reason I'm talking about this is because there's been quite some changes in PrefLib. So it started like this in 2013. It was mostly developed by Nick Maite when he was working together with Toby in what was called NICTA, something that no longer exists now. And that's what it looked like. Then when I started working on COMSOC, I found the design not very nice and convenient. And so I decided to kind of take over. And a couple of years later, we worked together with Nick to pull up what is kind of the new PrefLib. And there's mostly the main difference is except for the aesthetic is the backend. We have some kind of more powerful backend to do more interesting things. And so now I want to kind of list all the different new things that maybe you've missed. So one big thing that you may have discovered, or if you've recently downloaded data from PrefLib, is that we completely changed the format to allow for a more flexible thing. So the old format looked like this, and now we have something that looks like this. Let me just briefly say a few words about that. So what has changed is that we have this metadata section that is way more flexible than whatever was before. So meaning that we can actually encode way more information into the file, which has proved useful in many cases, typically relating data files to one another and these kind of things. We are renaming the alternatives. They now start at 1 instead of 0, in case that's of importance. This kind of weird line, whoever has ever worked with PrefLib and was not confused by this line, I'll be happy to know, because I never got to understood exactly what it represented, so got rid of that. We separated a bit better the kind of things, and I think that's it. So we have a new format, which unfortunately breaks whatever you had before. I see the chat is populating, but I'm not checking it, so if you have something urgent, just unmute and talk over me. And yeah, so we have this new format. We have a new type of data we're hosting that I call categorical preferences. Maybe the name is terrible. Let me know if so. The idea is that you have categories. The categories are ranked, and the alternatives has to be placed into the categories. But importantly, you can leave a category empty. So for instance, like I think one example is when you bid for reviewing, you may say yes to review, no, I don't want to review, or maybe, and maybe something like incompatibility or something like that. And so we have these categories in which the alternatives fit, and we want to kind of get preferences out of that. But if we just use a ranking, then we cannot really say, oh, you've said, like saying yes, maybe, or yes, no, kind of contracts to the same ranking, because you can't really left a spot empty there. So that's what we're using. And I think that represents more accurately the actual preferences or the actual report from the agents, and hopefully that can lead to more interesting things. Another change is that we have a lot of data sets, a lot of new data that came to the website, mostly thanks to Niklas Böhmer and Nathan Shah. I have no idea if they're around, but if they are, thanks for everything. They've compiled an impressive amount of data that was all described in his AMAS paper, and it now counts for like almost half of what is hosted on Preflib. So it's very nice. And Dominic spent some time digitalizing some breakfast item questions, which is a nice data set where you have like different scenarios and it's the same respondent. So if you're working on things where like same people or voter answer different kind of questions, you may want to have a look at that. Martin Lachner sent us the parliamentary election from Austria. So useful if you work on apportionment this thing. And then recently we had the New South Wales Legislative Assembly data, so incomplete rankings from New South Wales in Australia. So thanks. It's also a way for me to remind you that we are happy to incorporate new data, and that if you have anything relevant, to get in touch with us, because that's how the website kind of works, and we can keep maintaining things. Something else that I think is very nice and was kind of due for a long time and is finally there, is that we have the Preflib tools, which is a Python library that provides all the code to deal with Preflib instances. So it's about parsing instances and all of that. So that's really nice. It's hosted on the Python project integrator, so you can just pip install it. That's very useful. You pass all the formats. You have some kind of basic property checks that are implemented. And importantly, they still allow you to pass the previous data format. So in case that's something that you want to, you can. And they also have some sampler that were implemented, and I know some people quite like these samplers, but I will advise you not to use them anymore, and you'll see why in a moment. And yeah, so that's kind of what has been new and added to Preflib. It's the whole Preflib works because the community makes it. So we've tried to make it easier to contribute and things like that. So we are somehow hosting everything on GitHub. It's all open and everyone can contribute, submit requests or whatever that we review, we being Nick and I. We have 4 main GitHub repositories. There's the Preflib data, which is where we have the data actually hosted. So if you spot, I don't know, errors, mistakes, or whatever, you can just submit some stuff there. There's the Preflib tool, of course, the Python thing, the Preflib Django. So the website is now run as a Django application. So that's the one for the Django. So if you know what you're doing, you can also change stuff there. And we have this Preflib contrib, which is more or less just used to track the to-dos and the requests from the community. So if you have anything that you want to change or whatever, please use one of these tools, and that would be, then we'll try to do. Something potentially interesting for you is to know that on the Preflib data, we still host the old data in the old format. So if you have some old code that you don't want to change for some reasons, you should be able to retrieve everything if you want to. Okay, that's about it for Preflib. I will now move to other things. We have seen more or less recently kind of a large increase of different tools that have been developed by the community. I've tried to summarize some of them here. It's maybe not everything, and I'm sorry if I forgot some stuff, but we have like ways to deal with preferences, whether it's a preference repository or thing to sample them. We have mostly Python packages to deal with the aggregation, whether for voting or fair division. They're all kind of platforms and outreach that do platforms to do polls or voting or outreach things or analyzing different. So there's many things. I'll probably share my slides on my website. So in case you're interested, you can download that there. I just want to briefly mention 3 new things here as well. One is the Pabu tools, which is a Python library that allows you to work with participatory budgeting instances. So if you're running code on that or want to run code, I would strongly recommend using them. It's been developed by all the people there at the bottom. We have the Pabu Vs, which is a website that Marcus Utke has developed for us at the University of Amsterdam to kind of show and hopefully nicely how different aggregation methods for participatory budgeting at like what they achieve in terms of different measures. So have a look, and hopefully you can use that if you're trying to convince your local municipality to use PB or something like that. Something to explore. And then finally, the pref sampling, which is a new Python library that we're working on with Staniek, which is we simply provide preference samplers to kind of try to have one single reference library for that, where the samplers are verified and checked, and we know that they do what they're meant to do, and all of that. So yeah, try to think of all of this if you ever need them. I think it's quite nice for you to keep them in mind. And now come the last bit of my talk, where I'm hoping we can have a nice chat about different topics. And I'm it starts with the following observation is that tools are hard to keep alive, because even though they are very nice for the community and they are also very nice to develop at a personal level, there's a lot of things that make it hard to maintain them and to just keep on developing nice tools, such as the one we have at the moment in the community. It's long to develop, it takes a lot of effort, it's not necessarily super widely recognized on your academic CV. They are all very vulnerable to someone else stopping maintaining them, and then no one else knows how to do. So there's a whole lot of reason, and we all know website and platform that we liked at some point. Click on the link, it goes to nowhere. And yes, so I'm hoping that maybe we can start discussing what ideas we could have to ensure that the tools stay alive long, given that they're helping everyone. So maybe we can do something at the community level. And I will start with Preflib, which is, I think, one of the tools that is the most widely used within the community. And I start with that because I will, in October next year, slowly move outside of academia, meaning that my role of Preflib maintainer will no longer be mine. And we are hoping to be able to move Preflibs to the public domain. And by that, we mean kind of moving Preflib, giving Preflib to the hands of the community, of a set of people selected or voluntary or whatever from the community. And so if you are interested in being involved in Preflib to some extent, whether it is just kind of very general supervision or actual implementation and coding stuff, please get in touch. In the coming months, we'll have talk with different people on that topic. So yeah, please get in touch. Now, that's one example, and I think for Preflib, we have more or less agreed with the idea of trying to find a set of people responsible for it in the long run, even if not necessarily, how to say that, like not necessarily coding people, but like maybe more senior people who can be responsible for finding people to ensure the maintenance and all of that, kind of sharing maybe the burden of the maintenance. That's not the case for all of them, and that's not the case for it's not the case for all the tools. It's not clear whether it should be the case for all the tools, but I was hoping that maybe we could have a general idea of how we can make sure that the tools we develop and we all use are maintained and extended and developed nicely, how we can ensure that they all survive, how we can ensure that more such amazing tools come, because they really are, I don't know, I find them very nice and useful for everyone. Whatever, all these kind of questions that I feel may make it harder for people to, I don't know, to see the value of this thing, and to, I really think of it as something that the community benefits a lot from, and so maybe we should try to do something about that. Anyhow, it's a lot of circumventing. I will want to stop talking now. I have printed a couple of questions, and I hope that that's enough to start some kind of discussion where people freely unmute and propose idea or share their thought or discuss what they feel I don't know, is the state or could be or whatever. So I will now maybe stop sharing so that I can see all the faces, and I'm happy to try and host that discussion.
So maybe you can. Okay, so let's first give a round of applause to Simo. So please unmute yourself. Okay, thanks for the nice talk. So we had already lots of activity in the chat, and you have given us lots of further points to talk about, but maybe let's first talk about the questions that have been posted. So Errol was asking, why not use a standard format like JSON? And Nick has already partially responded to that, but maybe you want to comment on it a bit more.
Can we, I don't like what I'm about to do. Can we actually have the general discussion now that people are fresh, and I'll check the chat? I very briefly things, and I don't think there's anything very critical, so I'll maybe answer things. And
yeah, I was trying to keep up with the chat, Simon.
Yeah, thanks. Okay, so I'd be more interesting right now. I think we really should try to use this opportunity of having a lot of people here to discuss the general thing. So if I've seen that, for instance, Bill has commented on these things, maybe Bill, you want to start something?
Sure. I was just commenting that in economics, there's an umbrella organization, the Society for Social Choice and Welfare. We in COMSOC have a bunch of different organizations. We have no umbrella organization. And an umbrella organization might be the right vehicle to kind of maintain memory and maintain things like preflib.
Yeah, I think, so having discussed that a bit with Ule, I think that there was historical discussion, like I think in the past there's been discussion on whether there should be a general COMSOC thing. And I almost forget the reason why not, but I think it was more clear that it seemed a lot of machinery for an unclear advantage. Am I correct, Ule? Or?
I think in the beginning we were just young and agile and all these kind of things, so we didn't need any of that. Maybe that has changed. I don't know. So I'm not at all opposed to this. So a little bit this website that we have and the steering committee for the workshop, it provides a bit of structure, but it's really for the workshop. It's not officially responsible for anything else. And I think having a bank account creates a lot of work, but is also useful. So I think this is certainly something that one could think about.
Some of us are still young, just not you or me, Ula.
I was gonna wonder whether you were gonna stop 2 words earlier, but yeah.
Okay, so that's maybe one idea. I'll try to, I don't know, I'll keep notes and see if there's a need to do. So the idea of having a COMSOC organization that would then be somewhat in charge of all these things.
Yeah. in general, I mean, this is a hard problem, right? Like if one of the longest running probably data repositories that's not attached to a major university would be something like UCI's machine learning repository, which has changed, you know, it's kind of changed hands, but it's really been steered by sort of one guy for about 30 years now, but it's ingrained in all of the other tools. And so, you know, this is not a problem that academia is really positioned to fix. So it's really up to us to try to figure out like what's a good idea to try to maintain this, but it is going to come down to some of our energies. And in case, I don't know if someone was implying it or not, but I'm not planning to like, you know, disappear or anything. So this isn't us begging someone else to take this over, right? We just want to invite other people to be a part of it if they want to.
Well, so I think I chatted with Simon and Nick and a few others about this some time back. One possible idea is I think that those of us essentially groups that are running experiments on a more regular basis, I think it's more or less our responsibility and our duty to maybe provide people to Preflip and to do some of this work. So probably something like that should happen relatively soon, since Simon talking.
Yeah, sure. I think we missed the most important part of your answer, as in your suggestion. We did not hear it.
Okay, so there was more or less
now it's
we
definitely not
should
working
take it as
anymore.
our duty to
muted for the first half of your sentence.
apparently there are like 3 people around me, and each of them is handling the mute button, but not me, which makes it a bit difficult. So I was saying that essentially those groups that are running experiments regularly, it should be more or less our duty to somehow provide a person to maintain Preflip, because as if we're running the groups, we can provide some stability. Maybe the person will change, but we are responsible for providing that person. And within a group, there's some easier way of transferring knowledge. So yeah. I certainly would be willing to provide the time of one of persons in my group, probably not mine. And I guess that's what I have to say.
Okay, nice. René, I think you wanted to share something.
Yeah, so I'm in the group from Felix, and I have been the one who was looking after voting ML and Nix for the last couple of years. And the problem with these projects were that they are really old. So they were made before I started my PhD, and they were also made with technologies that I don't know. So I actually know a little bit of website programming and writing a backend and so on, but I don't know the backends that were used back then, right? And so it's really hard to take over a project like this, okay? And then that kind of was the first problem, and then the next problem is that like it's also like maybe the next one that comes after me, right? If there is nobody here anymore who knows how to do this, then the website will at some point just die, because nobody can fix them anymore if an error hooks up. And Nix is it's actually open source, so the source for Nix is also online. But if there is no interest, so if nobody takes up the task and really takes it forward, it just at some point becomes outdated, right? And the same thing, this does not only happen with websites, this also happens with tools, right? If the community moves mostly to a new language, right? Maybe one day Python is out of favor, and then like all these tools, like if nobody ports them to a new language, then they just can't be used anymore. And it's really hard to fix this if you don't have a continuous reason or motivation to upgrade this project and carry them forward, right? So it's hard, and I don't know how you can make incentives to actually achieve this.
Yeah, and just to double down on that, this is why Simon's work has been so impressive, because he came in to what was a project that I developed very badly in 2013 and really pushed me to work with him. And he did all the Django backend, all the conversion to modernize it and then move it into a community space. And like even just getting it into a space where people can pull and push against the main repositories and things like that was not a little bit of work, right? So there's a lot of work that goes into these. And again, this is not to put my industry hat on, but this is why industry does these things and not usually academia, because you have money, which motivates people to do things. We don't have that.
Yeah, but I mean, I agree, but still we could, I don't know, we are now 53 very clever people in this room, and we should be able to, I agree with what you say, René, and of course there's a cost, but so one thing maybe I think we mentioned at some point when I was chatting with Piotr, was this idea of could we have like a set of best practice for COMSOC to make it easier, you know, like, of course, you can't force anyone to do whatever, but you could be like, if you want to hope that your project can be picked up by people, then if it's a website, develop it in this, if it's a library, develop it in that. And then we have some kind of consensus-ish at the community level that could help for that. I don't know. Maybe I'm just foolishly hoping that we can push things at the community and not just all develop our thing on our little corners. Maybe it's foolish of me to think that, but I think there's some stuff that could be done if we wanted to, and if we don't want to, it's fine, and we can all be good. And if no one reacts to that, I will react to another thing you said, René, which is the question of the incentives. And I think that's something we can actually play on, especially since we are, after all, reviewing the papers and all of that. We can play on what recognition we give people who develop and maintain tools and develop them further, and things like that. So maybe that can be another topic to debate. But first, Peter, you have raised your hand. Peter, do you want to?
Yes, something at a far more practical level. You mentioned in your presentation the fact that you have changed the format of the data.
Yeah.
Have you also considered designing converters between the data formats? Since that seems something which could be easily automated using the kind of language technology I know they have having next door to you at the CWI. They have a lot of tools for language technology.
It is all translated indeed, yes. And all the tools are provided.
So you have the translators. It's not just by tweaking your programs, but you can go from any format to any other.
Yes, within reasonable bounds.
Okay, that's what I was curious about. Thanks. Yeah. And see you again, I hope, soon.
See you. Anyone on this idea of how to give more credit? Or maybe someone who wants to say, no, there's no need for more credit. What we do is theoretical research, not applied things. No one else?
This is not a new problem. I remember that 40 years ago, it was a problem to have students graduated on programming work.
Yeah, but maybe since the time we could have learned and actually value the input, and maybe we're more willing to.
I agree, but we are not learning some things.
Well, that's not true.
I think in some cases we have, we do, our traditional academic system does provide credit. So I think the 2013 Preflick paper is a good example. It's a very highly cited paper.
But to be clear, it got rejected twice, and it almost got rejected when it finally got accepted because
even
it was
better. So you improve
the
paper, and that's why it's so highly cited now. But so that one is an example where it works. And I think it's you know, good practice that if you're using something, I think it's good practice for the people who produce something to have some kind of citable thing out there. And you know, if there's at all a chance that it can be accepted somewhere with a formal status, I think the community should be welcoming for these kind of things. And then the community, when they're using it, they should be forthcoming with citing it. I think this is not, I'm not saying we have a very big problem in that. I think people are trying to do that. Maybe people are not often enough when they have produced something themselves, you know, have some technical report that very clearly describes it, that will still be readable in 5 years' time, and kind of cite it a couple of times themselves, and then hopefully people will take it up.
Yes,
Maybe Uli, is that, oh, sorry, go ahead, Peter.
Concerning the question of finding a kind of model organization, I might suggest that you take...
Peter, can we stick to the question we have at hand for now?
Yeah.
I don't think we've finished this line of thought, Nick.
Yeah. Just Uli, real quick, maybe one thing to think about, and I think this is maybe something we could actually do, is either adding like demo, or, you know, because like a lot of the big conferences have demo or implementation style, like 2-pagers or short papers or something like that. Maybe adding that to COMSOC for the workshop might be another venue for those things.
I think a COMSOC paper will not be an archival thing,
right?
So,
but it's somewhere. It's somewhere to
keep
get
it like that, right?
Yeah. No, so I'm saying that's good, but it's. So I agree. We are all
reviewing for the demo track at ICHKAI and AAAI as well. So
yeah.
If you see something reasonable coming up there, then, you know, try to be welcoming for these kind of things. And it's just a 3-page thing, so it doesn't have to satisfy the same academic standards as a regular paper. And it's good for the community if people do that. So it's good for you to write these papers, and it's good for you to, you know, seriously assess them when they get submitted, but also be, you know, not unnecessarily critical on something like this, because it benefits everyone if this is seen as something that works.
Yeah, but what I was trying to say was, is it maybe something that, at least on the community side, we could do is add a non-archival demo submission style to the workshop? Because one of the things that was disheartening, and for the graduate students here, just to be perfectly clear, the Preflib paper got rejected twice. The demo got rejected once. It took a year and a half to get a paper out on that thing, even though people were already using it and citing the website in their paper. And so what I was thinking is, much like we do with papers for COMSOC, where folks will put papers maybe a little bit earlier than they're ready for AAAI, or maybe even after, right? But it does that. It has that ability to get feedback from the tighter community and be non-archival, and then go on. So maybe that's one place, one stepping stone, especially for students who are just getting started. They can do a demo or get a 2-pager or something at the workshop, which is non-archival, and then push it farther to make it for a big one.
Yeah, very good idea.
Eric, I thought you wanted to say something, but maybe I think you're muted.
Yeah, I was just going to mention, it was already in the chat, but just bring it out. Following what Martin Lackner did for ABC voting, there's this Journal of Open Source Software, and they, you know, so that's just a way of having an archival small paper about your project. So Wes and I are going to do that for pref voting. At least that's what we were thinking of doing, just to make it citable, essentially.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, anyone else on that line of thought? And I mean, time is running, so I don't know what's the time allocated for the seminar, but if somehow you have urgent business.
So we are running quite long with the discussion, but I think maybe what we can do is end the official part here. And then whoever wants to stick around and discuss more, please stick around. So
okay.
So before we move on to more discussion, let's thank Simon again for starting this discussion. And let me mention that our next session will be on February 15. And we hope to see you then. Bye-bye.